Hey guys, welcome to Badaboom. We are recording this just after we finish watching the return of Invincible. Season 5 is now out on Amazon Prime. Just a heads
Season
up,
two.
season two, episode 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's early in the morning because we're like, hey, we gotta watch this and we gotta talk about it. But episode 5, season 2 of Invincible is now on Amazon Prime. This is gonna have spoilers in it. So if you haven't watched it, go watch that and then come back and share your thoughts with us in the comments. But if this episode can be summed up in a sentence or a phrase, it's cliffhangers, because this episode just had so many cliffhangers throughout. What did you think of all of them, Chris?
I didn't love it. I think the show is struggling one with its release schedule, and I didn't read the Invincible comics, so maybe it's really being faithful to the comics in terms of like how it's doling out its plots, but there's just so many different plots that they never really capitalize on. So it's like there's so much going on at once. And I think in a comic book, you could kind of have those, B, C, D plot lines, but in a series where every episode is an hour, I feel like nothing happens. There is some great action in this episode. Again, spoilers. You see things like duplicate die and Rex loses hand and stuff, which is
Which
pretty
she doesn't
crazy.
die in the comics. She does
Oh,
not die. Well, okay, like I haven't read all the comics. I haven't, but I know like in the end, she doesn't die. So it's like she has kids with the immortal in the very end.
oh,
So I'm hoping in the next episode they're like, oh yeah, Kate always leaves the spare back on home base just in case.
yeah.
But
I maybe but even so, like with all that, you're still like, wait, like, and then it ends with Alan, the alien, the Martian kind of, is it? No, he's not a Martian. He's just an alien.
no.
He just comes back and, it's great to hear, Seth Rogen and stuff, but you're also like, oh yeah, that was happening. And it's not cool. Like it's just, it's become exhausting at this point. So, there's some really great emotional moments in terms of, Mark, his brother taking responsibility for things that his father's done. And it's clear that's more of his mom side, his mom struggling, but also taking on, some of the responsibility and the burden with Mark to take care of his brother. And the moments with, the Thraxons are really emotional and really cool. And again, all the emotional stuff kind of like works where, he comes back from school, from space. He's got school stuff piled up. His relationships are on the rocks, whether it be with his friends or his girlfriend. And then, obviously he has the responsibility of being a superhero. But yeah, I just think I'm like, wait, like when is this show supposed to end? Like I think it's only like 9 episodes and I feel like nothing's happened this season. And you have the Viltrumites kind of that going on, but it almost feels like, hey, like he just got like his father's back was broken and they told him like, hey, like if you want to figure out things, you should probably like go to my books. And it just feels like he gets the earth and it's like, okay, let me just go back to my normal life, but just watch my brother. So yeah, I think the show is just struggling with, the amount of plots they've introduced. We still haven't seen, Angstrom Levy. That's still a thing.
Yeah.
So there's just so much. And again, the I'm sure the books, this is trying to be faithful to what happens in the comic books, but there comes a point where it has, it's an adaptation. I think the first season did a really good job of having some things in the background, but also sort of like every episode was almost contained so that you got to like watch it and enjoy it for what it was. Whereas it seems like, hey, like, did you guys just, what did you do? Are there new writers? Or did you believe in the material so much that you're like, okay, let's make it bigger and bigger and bigger without like regarding like pacing? So I think the pacing and is something that the show is like really struggling with. What did you think?
I mean, there's a ton of stuff that happens in the comics. There's tons of stuff that we haven't even seen yet. So it's tough to say, like, I don't know off the top of my head how many seasons they've assigned or like they've greenlit for Invincible. So they may be trying to just say, hey, like if we only got a couple seasons, we need to fit in the plot lines that we really want. But I think it's kind of a almost an analogy of just like how crazy life can be when as Mark gets older as the season goes on, there's just so much stuff that's happening all the time and he has less and less control over it. Whereas like in the first season, it's like I'm in high school. Every month is like an episode because you kind of don't have much going on in your life at that point in time. So but that's just like a personal analogy I'm kind of drawing. I don't think it's something the writers intended. There's a ton of stuff going on, but I think it's working itself out all right because while I am upset that like what the show that this episode ends just like that, it's like this is what you should have put on. Like this is not a good first episode back because I want to see some sort of resolution or some sort of like, oh, okay, we wrapped that up or we're gonna start something new. But it's like, nope, here's all this stuff from previous episodes that we're now trying to resolve and we don't resolve it at all. So yeah, there's great stuff to come and the next episode is definitely gonna be exciting, but there's still just so much more in the series to explore that it's like we haven't scratched the surface at all. And if we haven't moved into even the deeper parts of the comic, it's like, how are we handling this now? You know, like it's not necessarily the best. It's still good content, but it's not the best, and it's not necessarily the most true to the comics either. So it's like I don't know how well the rest of the series or season is going to go, but I am going to watch it. I'm going to be up at midnight to watch it as well when every episode drops.
Well, for me, that's the problem. I'm not excited about it at all anymore. Like as cool as the action, as gory as it is, it's become sort of hollow because it's like, hey, like none of this really is going anywhere, so I don't really care. And you kind of see sort of, the response to the show online too, like where people have dropped off in terms of the hype. So I think Amazon's really dropped the ball with the release schedule and sort of how they've handled this. If you're going to do it this way, where you had a deep break, the season should have been built that way, and not built that way in the sense like, okay, like you get like 4 episodes and then the following 4 episodes. No, from like an actual like structural standpoint, like the season should have been written that way so that
Yeah.
you could kind of pick up on these things and you're like, okay, like I'm waiting, 3 4 months for this second part of the season. So, you should be able to pull on some of these threads, and then you get the episode and you're like, well, now you've introduced a whole bunch of other stories that kind of somewhat move things along, but not really. And now we only have a couple episodes to kind of like further this story like a little bit forward. So I just don't know where they're going with any of it. And it just seems like, okay, like now we're just expanding the world without any regard of like closing these threads. And like I said, I haven't read the comic, so I'm sure a lot of these, they're being as faithful as they can to that comic, but also it has to be adapted for a TV series. Like you can't do everything that's in the comic, even though it's an animated series. So you have to figure out a way to enhance things. And I think the first season did that really well. Like it was a really great season of TV in terms of like the twists, the turns. It just kept you watching. And now it just feels like between the release schedule and the way the series is going, it just feels like every episode I'm like, did I like season one that much? It's one of those things that kind of puts into question whether, like, was it that great, or was it just one of those things where it was the first time I'd seen anything like it, and it changed my whole perspective of what a comic book adaptation could be. But now that we're kind of going deeper, I'm like, wait, like, is the Invincible comic even that great? Like, what? And funny enough, it's a Robert Kirkman adaptation, and this was the same thing that happened to The Walking Dead. It was like all season one. was amazing. And then season 2, you're like, man, this is boring. Like they're just walking around and nothing's happened. You know, there's more walking than dead. and and it just seems like that with the show where they just keep introducing these different like plot threads, and you're like, well, are you gonna like follow through with any of this? Like, do you guys know for sure you're gonna get like 10 seasons where you'll be able to do this? Are you sure people will be with you along for the ride this long? You know, I doubt anyone watched the end of The Walking Dead. By the end of it, they had dragged it along to the point where you're like, hey, no one cared at the end. And now they're on their second or third spinoff, so you're like, wait, this who has AMC anymore? Who
Yeah.
cares? And I just feel like Invincible, where it was, you know, in the cultural zeitgeist, it's losing its relevance in that regard. But it is valid, you know. I think sometimes people are like, oh yeah, this sucks just because it's the internet inside of the best thing or the worst thing they've ever seen. But you know, the show is just painfully average, and you know, I'm just losing interest, and it's kind of making me be like, all right, like at least The Boys comes out in June.
Yeah. Well, hey, good news for you is that in the comics, there is like a time jump where we essentially jump all the way back to season 1, but Mark knows everything that's ever happened and kind of tries to like fix things before they fall apart. So maybe that's what they're trying to really build up to, but at the same time, it's like exactly like what you said. Like, why does this have to feel like, oh, I'm suffering, only to get to the point to be like, well, why did I watch all that? You just erased everything. So, you know, hopefully it doesn't, it's hopefully the content leading up to that time jump is going to be good content and content that we're going to enjoy, because I do really think the comic book is a great story. But what do you guys think? Let us know what you thought about this most recent episode of Invincible in the comments. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Are you looking forward for the next one coming out next week? Let us know. And with that, bada boom.
Bada boom.
Thank you for listening to the Badaboom podcast. Keep the conversation going on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Get in the comments on our YouTube channel and let us know what you'd like to hear next. And please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen.